Hello guys, I hope you're well and welcome to the Raw Coaching Off-Season Blueprint webinar. This was live and for all of you that did miss it, I'm very, very sorry that you weren't able to make it. However, the recording for the webinar was not a success, some technical issues slash problems, so I am re-recording it, so thank you all very much for tuning in. We're going to get stuck in with the introduction first of all. Now, in this webinar, we're going to go through, obviously, the off-season blueprint, how to maximize your growth potential through a growth or muscle building phase. But to do so, we need to understand the goal and manage expectations of what you're about to, the journey you're about to head off on or preparing to at some point in time. Setting up for success. How do you actually lay the foundations for a successful growth phase? Tools for the job. What you're gonna do, what you're gonna use, how you're actually gonna manufacture the muscle specifically. Needs basis and specification for you as an individual, and how in which you're gonna travel through the journey. Troubleshooting. There will be some troubleshooting you need to do. Every biological individual client that I've ever worked with has faced different realities and you could say problems throughout their entire journeys, but specifically for a longer journey like this, and it is a longer journey, it's not as quick and as easy as a fat loss phase would be, for example, like I've filmed webinars for before. And then I'm going to take you guys through the raw off-season model. Now, this is something that's completely individual to myself. It's a process that I work with all of my guys on, providing obviously time permitting. But if we have an opportunity to go through an effective growth phase, which again is considered as a longer muscle building phase, this is the model I use, and it's extremely successful. And I'm going to show you that in the case study and examples that I give you. Okay, obviously we won't be able to run through questions because there's nobody here that is live, but I will give you guys the opportunity to ask me some direct questions based on you specifically, and obviously any realities that you face that potentially I don't cover or you want to know more about. So getting stuck in, understanding the goal and managing expectations. Number one is to always be growing. Okay, we need to appreciate that, certainly for a longer muscle building phase, but in any muscle building phase, we need to be able to be turning over translation of proteins and muscle growth. Okay, that is by any means necessary. So what variables we have in place at the time and how we're going to be able to manufacture growth through all eventualities, and there will be some eventualities, whether it be in your personal life, in your work life, in anything. We need to always be growing. Okay. Secondly, we need to understand the start point and the main factor for overall success and growth. Guys, fat feeds fat, and getting fatter creates saturation and stress, which will result in lack of response. Okay. If you are in a position where composition doesn't really justify your ability to be able to transition into a growth phase, just get lean. Just get leaner. Get yourself in a better position. I promise you, you will be so much happier. There's a big misconception of, well, if I'm out of shape now, I might as well just carry on going, or I might as well just get started. Or understand that the quality of what you actually produce, if you start in a worse position, will be worse. And it's really, really not worth your time to go through such an extensive phase that in reality is probably the most important phase of your journeys of physique development. Don't start out of shape. Do the work early. It also gives you a longer period of time to be able to grow, because once you're in a position where you are fat and you are unresponsive, you will literally find yourself in a position where you will not continue to move forward, or you'll tap out because sensitivity won't be present, and that will be that. We want to have control and stability. That needs to be in place, and maintenance is always key for that. I'll always stand behind, certainly in my personal coaching, For all the clients that I'm able to work with, maintenance is always the position that we need to find our way back to or work our way from. Okay, the reason for that is because it gives you control. It genuinely, if you are in a position where you can start off in maintenance, small manipulations, whether up or down, grow or fat loss, will make a larger impact. If you're in a position where you're not in any kind of control and you don't have any kind of stability through your body weight, composition, and response, then you're never really going to be able to get a grasp on what is changing and why it's changing as well. Something I always like to do for my guys on the team is lay out markers of progress. Okay, this is going to come down to things like understanding what you're actually trying to achieve on a week-by-week basis, clarity and communication. Certainly if you're in a coach-client relationship, whether you are a coach watching this or whether you are a client, you need to be in a position where you understand what you are trying to achieve, because otherwise the investment just isn't going to be present. It's not. Anyone can start a growth phase and say, right, I'm going to get absolutely massive. Brilliant. And how are you planning on doing that? And over what period of time are you planning on materializing X? And over what period of time are you planning on materializing Y? And there is always a question of auto-regulation and being able to be able to adapt. But you need to have an idea of what you're actually achieving at what time. Okay, guys? Growing is hard and will test you, but it can still be enjoyable with the right clarity and information. As I've said, growing is hard. It's very, very, very testing. If any of you guys have gone through, guys or girls have gone through an extensive fat loss phase, you'll understand that a large majority of it is pretty easy. Okay, if you're talking about maybe like a competition prep and getting very, very low levels of body fat, that's a testing time. That's not an easy position to be in. However, you tend to find that coming out of the starting gates of a growth phase is very exciting. You start to get fed and performances fly in, but there comes a time when you will hit that brick wall where no longer really fancy eating, and you also find yourself in a position where everything's a little bit slower and it's a little bit less gratifying. You don't get that immediate gratification like you do on fat loss, where you see the scale weight come down in week 1 and week 2 it continues to go and you're getting leaner and you're getting better. Really, it's really not that gratifying at all. So it's even more important that the variables that are in place are actually going to show you the results you want. But how we manage that again is by being excited about the journey, number one, and also having things in place like your food, enjoying your training, understanding the enjoyment factor of resting as well, obviously the importance of resting, but on a rest day, plan something in your off season because you should, or your growth phase, because you should be able to do so. And then peaks and troughs and adiposity, tissue balance, and the vision. Okay, so yes, the vision will be blurred. I've got guys on the team, and I've paid reference to them on the call, but it's easy to lose sight. It is. Once you're in a position where, again, you have materialised some body fat, which you will, you're in a position where you're pretty happy with your food. You're not longing for anything really, because you probably had a number of off-plan meals and you've eaten all the off-plan meals that you dreamt about when you were lean, and it's just really the same shit every day. You find yourself in a position where you're like, I've had enough of this now. Maybe I'm good to start getting lean again. But the reality is, spending time there will very, very much materialise more progress, and you'll thank yourself at the end of it, trust me. But yeah, peaks and troughs and adiposity, you will find that when making adjustments, composition does change initially, but every single time you make a change and you allow that change to really, really materialise and you consolidate at that new set point, that new weight, you'll find that you should get bigger and also, I wouldn't say leaner, but certainly be able to maintain composition. That should be an inevitability. Okay, so setting up for success, how do we actually want to start this phase? How do we actually want to get moving? Good composition first. Be in a good position of body fat, good level of body fat. If I was to give you a range, I'm not going to, because the the guys and girls watching this will be like, brilliant, okay, cool, so I'll make sure I'm there. You want visible lines and you want sensitivity. You want to be ready for food, and you want to be in a position where, as I said, good body composition is good. If you're unaware of what good body composition will be like, I could give you an example, but again, at the end, we'll go through the reality of me answering some of your questions personally. Set a maintenance set point before you're starting your push. Reason for that is so when you start making adjustments and you make one change at a time, as it says on number 3, you will be in a position. You'll be in a position where you'll be in far more control, and you can see things, and that also keeps you motivated as well. When you make an adjustment, you can actually see the materialisation of that, because you know what you're planning on materialising. Have a percentage rate of gain in place from the get-go. If you weigh 100 kilos and you put on 0.5% of body weight per week over a 20-week period of time, you should know where you're going to land, right? And you also know that if you're off that percentage rate of gain target, then maybe adjustments need making, which means maybe more food, an adjustment in training, or potentially if you're an assisted client or athlete, then potentially be looking at adjustments in PEDs as well. But I tend to lean more towards the conservative side of 0.5%. I found even over a 30 to 40 week growing phase, which I have managed to string guys out for, some of my guys out for before, although again it was very, very difficult and required a lot of management and motivation. 0.5% is a really good place to be, because it will alleviate your ability to gain too much adiposity and body fat, but you will also be in a position where you can ensure that you are growing. Because again, if you're putting on a kilo of body weight every single week, you're gonna find yourself in a position where you're going to be gaining a lot of body fat, because that isn't going to be muscle, quite simply. However, you can say that 0.5%, maybe even 0.25%, if you want to be super conservative, you will be seeing great amount of tissue accrual there. Commit to one change at a time, and this goes off needs basis. So for you guys, I think needs basis on the next slide, isn't it? Okay, so I'll go through that in a little bit more depth. But yeah, focus on what the actual job is. If you are in a position where you're not achieving your rate of gain target, then changes will need to be made. I would always advise routine to be absolutely 110% nailed down. Do not miss on your routine. You will lose time, and if you lose time for the mountain of food that you could be eating, you will put yourself very, very far back. And I've had clients that have come out of fat loss phases or have entered into growth phases, and their routine's nailed down, but as they get a little bit deeper in, again, maybe motivation starts to slip, lose sight of the vision, and then all of a sudden routine starts going out the window. And I'm seeing on check-in forms that they didn't go to bed until 1 o'clock in the morning because they left their meals too late. So routine is key, but routine is key anyway for creating the best you. All right, so that should already be a priority and focus point. And then don't lose sight of the goal. Just don't lose sight of the goal. Understanding your why, having it on a pedestal, and continue to work towards it every single day. Remember, one thing I would say about physique development is there's not a better project to work on yourself, fact. But there's nothing more rewarding than looking back and having your own success story. I put the work in even during tough times, and I managed to materialise this. And you can wear that as a badge of honour every single time. Ask yourself questions: what does my physique say about me? That's a very, very good question to ask, because it's your first impression. Okay, so tools for the job. Obviously this is going to go for assisted and non-assisted individuals. Food, maintenance calories as baseline with slow and steady escalations. I would normally lean towards between 5 and 10%. If we have, based on biodata and feedback, so I'm talking about things like hunger, okay, recovery capabilities, muscle soreness, performance. If we're starting to see a downregulation in performance or recovery, and hunger is high, but body weight is actually in a position where you can't really justify 110% making changes, you might want to lean towards a 5% escalation. And I would normally lean towards a carbohydrate escalation because it's just a better macronutrient to adjust. You don't need to eat too much protein, baseline protein. Studies have shown to support muscle protein synthesis like 0.7, but one gram per pound is absolutely fine. Is more than enough. So unless we're leaning towards dietary fats, then I would normally make adjustments off carbohydrates first. If we're in a position where we need a bit more of a robust change, I wouldn't make any more of an adjustment than 10%. 10% of calories in carbohydrates as an adjustment. You're normally looking for most individuals at around 50 grams of carbs if you wanted a round number, but you should be able to work that out based on where your calories are, and then obviously the adjustment and change that we're seeing. Training, okay, MAV, MRV, or MAS and MRS. I prefer MRS personally, but maximum adaptive volume or stimulus to maximum recoverable volume or stimulus. I don't believe in maintenance volume, and from a specification perspective, if we're trying to bring up weak body parts, I would never personally have any of my athletes, and this is due to experience myself and athletes actually. I don't agree with sitting muscle groups on maintenance whilst you try and grow everything else. I don't think it does anything. I think we should adjust based on biological individuality and exploit novelty as a priority. So when we're looking at adjustments in training, if we were going to make adjustments, we would ask simple questions like, okay, you've ran a push session, for example. What's sore, what's not? My chest is very sore, my delts aren't sore, my triceps aren't sore. Okay, well, based off and something I do for my clients on onboarding is a physique analysis. We know that an area that we want to focus on is delts, and you're not getting sore in delts. So we're going to make adjustments there. If your chest is getting sore, chest volume can stay. Let's increase delt volume. And how in which we do that will be based on your programming and what is in place. I also think that certainly moving through an escalation phase or a growth phase, exploiting novelty is a very, very good way to keep things fresh, enjoyable, mentally drive some adaptations as well, but certainly physical. I like the reality of creating almost like newbie gains, starting on a new exercise. And I'm not talking about rotating every 4 to 6 weeks, but what I'm simply saying is be realistic with, if you are in a position where you're running one in specific push movement and you're a client or your client says, I feel like I've had enough of this, I've ran it, maybe I'm getting a little bit sore through the movement pattern in the joints, which can and will happen if you're getting substantially stronger. Okay, well, let's do a different press variation. I always find that it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to really master the movement, and then there on in you're progressing it exponentially. So exploit novelty and don't be afraid to rotate some movements in and out. Rest. Reactive has been shown to be more successful in my opinion, but I do usually use a guideline based on track data. So based on weeks moving through any phase, I will have growth phase specifically, I will have an understanding as to when I first initially deploy a deload based on biodata and feedback from the client, and if that's he or she can normally train for 6 to 7 weeks before feeling pretty beaten up and going past that sort of inverted U where you're like you've overreached. I would then say, okay, well, maybe we won't push them that far, but we could potentially predetermine a deload at week 6 to 7. If we get there and performance is flying and there's no validation or confirmation that we should or even need to run a deload, we're not going to run a deload, because what waste of time that would be. We'll continue to run it until we start to pick up on signs of over fatigue and a need for a deload, and then deploy. How in which you run that deload, again, it comes back to individuality, what type of individual I will be working with. Some guys I will sit at home all week and they'll just eat their food and rest and hit their steps, but not train at all. Some guys I wouldn't be able to do that with, so as a result I'd run a devolumized approach to training, normally within a higher rep range with some reps in reserve based on their previous numbers logged of one working set. So say their back off set, say 2 to 3 reps, and if it was 100 kilo bench press, well, that wouldn't be programmed. 100 kilo bench press for 12 reps, I would say do 10 or 9 and then leave it there. Okay. If you are a PEDS user, the stat design doesn't have to be extensive. Obviously appreciating that now would be the time to maximize exposure, because that's what these drugs are there for. You're certainly not going to maximize exposure during a dieting phase, because they're there to drive protein translation and accretion, so and maximize recovery capabilities, which is what you'll need when you're in a growth phase. I would always look at a test baseline to start, some form of DHT, whether that be Masteron or Primo, and then I've put a 19 norandrols as in a Superdrol or an Anadrol. The reality for a NOR19, and I'm not leaning towards trend here, it's not a compound, and I talked about this in the fat loss phase. It's not a compound I think is necessary during a growth phase, certainly with the idea that its main function for my deployment would be tissue preservation, anti-catabolic agents specifically. You are not in a catabolic or in a catabolic state during a growth phase. Fact, nothing about a growth phase is going to create a catabolic response within the body, so that's out. But you could look at something like an androlone or an anadrol to drive strength capabilities at the very back end, and that is something I do run with my guys if and when necessary, based on needs. Obviously, if I was finding a small stall in our ability to progress or make any changes and I needed to, and we had 4 to 6 weeks left of a growth phase before making a transition into a recovery phase or whatever that may be, then potentially an anadrol going in. If volume of injectables was quite high, you could potentially say, well, I don't want to inject anymore, so maybe an oral deployment of like an anadrol or a Superdrol would be good. Drive strength capabilities that will squeeze out a little bit more progression before making that transition. That would be an idea that I think is very valid. And then ancillaries, insulin sensitizers, antioxidants, growth hormone, ARBs, thyroid support. So insulin, I would absolutely have present if the athlete, if it worked from an athlete management perspective for deployment. Reason for that: reduce stress on the pancreas. Beta cell function is key. We're going to be consuming a lot of carbohydrates, whether you're an assisted or unassisted lifestyle or competitive client. So there is value in having support to be able to utilize that food and uptake nutrients as effectively as possible. Insulin sensitizers, things like metformin. I would usually lean towards Lantus, and I would not usually deploy pre-bed. I always find that stabilizes blood glucose level more effectively, because that's when food volume is going to be the highest within the body. It's not going to be in the morning once you've probably cleared and there's been an enormous amount of GI transit throughout the course of your sleep. So I always find that stabilizes blood glucose more effectively. You could use a rapid acting insulin if food volume is very, very high, maybe around peri-workout. But my bread and butter would literally be a slow releasing or a Lantus pre-bed for stabilization of blood glucose. Insulin sensitizer and antioxidants, things like metformin, really, really good. Fantastic from an antioxidation perspective. Certainly if you're an assisted athlete, that would go in pre-bed between 500 milligrams and 1,000, depending on needs. Growth hormone, I don't usually split the dosing on growth hormone. I don't run an awful lot of it. Number one because of cost for clients. I love the fact that Clients are happy to invest if they're in a position to, but at the same time, with the name of growth hormone, you would expect it to be some supersonic pathway. It is and it isn't. Will it make a difference? Yes. Is it the absolute sole focus for you and your ability to progress? No. I would usually run three IUs pre-bed for the same reason. This is a conversation me and Dr. Dean had, the formulator of supplement needs and one of my mentors, an absolutely incredible mind. And the reality that when you slip into deep sleep pathways, you see an increase in natural release of growth hormone. By the time exogenous use peaks, if you were to run it pre-bed, you almost have like a double hit of growth hormone, which from a personal perspective, as an athlete myself, as well as a coach, I've been doing this a long time, and you're able to understand a little bit more in depth about your own body and things that you see. So that anecdotal response or experience helps, and it makes a difference, in my opinion. It really does. And then an ARB, angiotensin 2 receptor blocker, telmisartan, I'm sure you guys would have heard of it. Manage blood pressure, fantastic for things like that, certainly if you're an assisted user. Thyroid support would be based on the individual client specifically. I run all year a baseline of thyroid support. I prefer to have that in. I don't with every single client, based on, again, blood work and the need specifically. But having a managed metabolic output is not a bad thing. Certainly going through a growth phase where you are going to be gaining body fat and you are going to be slowing down to a certain extent. And then lipolytics goes against the grain conversation I actually had with Victor Black, and we talked about the reality of trying to reduce the amount of adiposity throughout a growth phase, and why not? If negative deleterious effects are very, very low, and something like a clenbuterol, for example, could there be value in deployment throughout a growth phase? And I definitely think there could. They also do show some signs of androgenicity as well. So potentially you would consider utilization of Clen throughout, maybe not your entire growth phase, but maybe on your initial departure from fat loss to growth phase. It's a consideration. It certainly is a consideration. Okay, needs basis approach. So this is where we really go down the reality of how we most effectively manage you guys, okay, or manage yourself. What is the goal? To always be growing. What can be achieved? What can we use to achieve that? The tools that we've just discussed. Has that worked based on percentage rate of gain target? Yes or no? Repeat. Okay. There is a caveat to this, but if I'm checking in and I'm checking a client in, I'm like, right, okay, we haven't achieved the percentage rate of gain, or we have, based over maybe not a 1 week period, but a 2 week period of time. Do we need to make changes? Are we in a position where everything's moving very well? Is appetite in a good place? Is food in a good place? Is training in a good place? Performance recovery? Yes. Okay, so we probably don't need to change anything. It's only when we do, we say, based on the data that is in place, if you are someone who is very, very hungry, performance is starting to take a bit of a hit, and recovery is starting to take a bit of a hit, you're not going to increase training volume for that individual, because if you were to increase training volume, you're going to find yourself in a position where that biodata and feedback is going to be even worse. So you would say, well, I'm hungry, or the client and athlete is hungry, so we're going to make a change to the food. Obviously, adjust by 5 to 10%, and then assess going from there. Okay, and that's essentially how it goes. Based on the feedback, you should be making adjustments as and when necessary, and it's as simple as that. Okay, so troubleshooting. I'm gonna jump on the second recording. This is going to be in 2 parts, because the second part is going to be going through the raw model. So come back for number 2. episode 2 or part 2 of the off-season blueprint, and I will see you and take you through troubleshooting and how to manage these variables.